All right, good morning, everyone. Before we begin, to kind of address the elephant in the room, COVID-19. I know there's a lot of fear and anxiety around the community in regards to healthcare worker exposure, the public exposure. I just want to say a big thank you to all the people who have been putting in a lot of hard work, both from the frontline staff and also UW Medicine at large. And on that note, next Thursday's Grand Rounds, we'll be having a COVID-19 update if we're still having large gatherings at that time. So stay tuned, but next Thursday for Grand Rounds, we're having a COVID-19 update. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Paula Houston this morning. She's the current director for healthcare equity for UW Medicine. She received her undergraduate degree from Syracuse University, a master's degree in health administration from the University of Washington, and then her doctorate in educational leadership from Seattle University. Prior to her current role here at UW, she was the CEO of Sound Generations in Seattle, the largest nonprofit in the state providing services and programs to seniors, adults with disabilities, and those who care for them. She was also the executive director of the Meredith Matthews East Madison YMCA, the clinical manager of Carolyn Downs Family Medical Center, and spent 7 years with the Seattle and King County Public Health. In each of these leadership roles, she led the initiation and enhancement of the organization-wide diversity, equity, and inclusion work in the effort to improve service delivery and outcomes for our most historically oppressed and marginalized populations. Additionally, she's also an 11-time national and 6-time world champion powerlifter. In 2012, she was inducted into the USA Powerlifting Hall of Fame. With that said, please join me in welcoming Dr. Houston as she presents Advancing Healthcare and Equity.
Well, thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Douglas. I'm really pleased to be here with you this morning and pleased that so many of you showed up. I was just telling Douglas that I had fully expected this to be canceled, so I appreciate that you all are here with us today. I have nothing to disclose. We like to start all of our presentations with this acknowledgement of the land that we occupy here today at University of Washington was the traditional land of the Tulalip, Muckleshoot, Duwamish, and Suquamish tribal nations. Those were the original caretakers of this land, and without them, we would not have access to this learning, teaching, working, and healing environment, and we want to take this opportunity to recognize and thank them. So what are we going to do today? So this is a little diagram about how we do our work. Our team that includes Dr. Patricia Dawson, who is our medical director for healthcare equity, and Keith Vinci, who is our program operations specialist, have gone around and done what we are calling kind of our foundational presentation and training about our healthcare equity work. And we think about it in 4 quadrants of what we want our workforce to know about. We want to understand the awareness of what's going on now. So we talk about how things are happening in society in terms of racism, institutional racism, discrimination. Very important to understand the history of how we got here and what role medicine played. We have some opportunity to have some experiences and knowledge, so we're going to have some interaction so you can learn from each other and understand other people are having different experiences than what you might have. We do some skill building where we go through some key concepts, and then all of that we expect to turn into action where we change our policies and our systems to ultimately decrease health disparities and allow all of our patients to have the opportunity for the best health outcomes. So one of the things that we like to do is talk about identity. And here at UW Medicine, we want to make sure that we are creating a workforce that is inclusive and where everyone feels that they can bring their full selves to work. All of who they are, all of their experiences, all of what they look like, all of their thoughts. So we're going to do an exercise, a welcoming exercise, where you're going to be a little active, okay? So how this is going to work is that I am going to call out some parts of your identity. And if you identify with that, I'm going to ask you to stand up And everyone who is still sitting is going to applaud you wildly. I'm guessing that this morning at 8 o'clock, you have not been applauded for just being who you are. So this is your opportunity. It also allows us to see who's in the room and who isn't in the room, and think about, what does that mean? For instance, when we're making our decisions and we put our teams together, what voice is not being heard, what voices are being heard? So here we go. First identity is birth order. So if you were a firstborn, please stand up and be welcomed and recognized. Yeah. All right, very good. If you were a lastborn in your family, please stand up and be welcomed and recognized. Yeah. How about second? Yeah. Third. Yes, you can be second, third, and last, all of that. Fourth? Fourth? Oh, no fourths, okay. Fifth? Sixth? Seventh? 8? 9? 10, 11? 9, okay, yeah. 10? 11? 12? I've only ever had to go to 12, but I've done that twice. Anybody past 12? No, okay. How about only children? Who are my onlys? Yeah. How about anybody a twin or other multiple? Yeah. Anybody adopted? No, okay, good. So we do birth order because if you think about it, someone who might be that youngest child in the family of 12 probably knows how to get along with a whole lot of people and get their voice heard. And that oldest child may be someone who feels very responsible. So if you think about the teams we put together, those will be 2 people we'd want to have on our teams. So next one is geographic place of birth, somewhere you were raised or spent a significant part of your life in. So if you were born, raised, or spent a significant part of your life on the continent of Africa, please stand up and be recognized and appreciated. Yeah. How about Asia? Yes. Europe? Yes. The Middle East? Oh, okay. Central America? Okay, just notice that. South America? Okay. Other parts of North America, not the US? Interesting. That really happened. Oh, one over here. Okay, yeah. Not standing, but raise a hand. Okay. How about Australia? Yeah, okay. The Caribbean? No? Antarctica? I just throw that in there because why not? Someday somebody's going to stand for that, I know. Okay, how about right here in the Great Pacific Northwest? Yeah. Other parts of the West Coast, including Alaska and Hawaii? Yeah. The Northeast? That's me. The Midwest? Yep, okay. Oh, good. A lot of Midwesterners, okay. The South? Okay, yeah. Southwest, including Texas? Always have to say that because Texans are special. Did I miss any place that someone would like to be recognized for? Okay. Now we're going to go on to ethnicity and heritage. If you are of African heritage, please stand up and be recognized and appreciated. Yeah. European heritage, please stand up and be recognized and appreciated. Yeah. All right. Asian heritage? Yeah. Middle Eastern? Okay, Pacific Islander? Just noticed that. Latinx? Yeah. Native American? Okay. How about anybody of Jewish cultural heritage? Yeah. Is there anyone whose cultural heritage I left out and who would like to be recognized and appreciated? I didn't hear. 10th generation American. Okay, well, please stand up and be recognized. Now we're going to go on to one part of our identity that's often harder for us to identify with, but it's often one that follows us into adulthood, and that is our socioeconomic class growing up. So I'm going to call out 3 different classes. It's going to be poor or less than enough financial resources, enough financial resources, or more than enough financial resources. So if you were raised poor or with less than enough financial resources and would like to be recognized and appreciated, please stand up. Yeah. If you were raised with enough financial resources, please stand up. And if you were raised with more than enough financial resources, please stand up. All right. So we like to do that one because if you think about it, someone who was raised poor or with less than enough financial resources is often very resourceful, knows how to get a lot done with a little. Someone who was raised with more than enough financial resources often has very high expectations. And again, you think about our teams, our work teams, those might be 2 people you'd really want to have on your team. You get a lot done. Obviously, there are lots of other parts of our identity that we can do, but those are ones that we just don't often think about, but often really influence how we move through the world as adults. So, unless you were living in some other dimension for the last couple of years, most people probably saw this headline, right? In case you weren't here. This was a couple of years ago. This was a story of 2 African-American men who walked into a Starbucks in downtown Philadelphia. They sat down, they did not order anything. They were waiting for a 3rd person to have a business meeting. The manager of that store decided that she didn't like the way that looked. They made her look nervous, uncomfortable. So she chose to call the police and have them taken away. If you missed that one, there are others. Old school. This is a headline about a pair of Native American teens who were on a college tour in Colorado, and they had the university police called on them because a white parent also on the tour said that they made her nervous. This is a story of a Black female student at Yale who had the police called on her. She was just napping in her own dorm lounge. This one makes me chuckle. This is a group of Black women who had the police called on them on a golf course. They were accused of playing too slow. We have any golfers out there? It's kind of slow, huh? So I don't know what too slow actually is. This is down in California. This was a group of Black female filmmakers who were checking out of an Airbnb. They were putting their luggage in the trunk of their car, and the neighbor across the street waved. Because they did not wave back, she decided they must be burglars. This was babysitting while Black. This was a man in Georgia who was babysitting 2 white children. They were coming out of a Walmart. He put the children in the car, drove away. A white woman saw that and decided, well, that can't be right. So she followed him for a time and then called the police. The police came, pulled him over, stopped the car, pulled him out of the car, pulled the children out of the car. Everybody was interrogated as to whether or not they were supposed to be together. This is another one of my favorites. This is a 12-year-old African-American boy who had the police called on him because he was mowing a lawn and crossed the property line. There was no demarcation, so he mowed part of somebody else's lawn for free, and that neighbor called the police on him. I like this one because the community rallied around this young man, and so his lawn mowing business is booming, and so hopefully he has his college fund set for him. This was in our own backyard. about a year and a half ago. This was the incident in Kirkland when a social worker, African-American male, was on a supervised visit with a mom and a child. They went into a Kirkland yogurt shop, sat down. He did not order anything. And because he did not, the employee in that store decided again that that made her nervous. And so she called her manager, and the manager instructed her to call the police and have him taken away. And so she did, and they did. And then we're back to Starbucks. They had to apologize to a Latino customer because when he got his drink order, instead of his name being written on the cup, there was a racial slur. So people say, well, why are you telling us this? Are these just isolated incidents? You're just doing this to be provocative. So no, this was a Kaiser Family Foundation study from a couple of years ago that said 53% of Blacks and 36% of Hispanics reported that they have experienced unfair treatment in the past 30 days because of their race in places like work, stores, restaurants, with the police, of course, and while getting health care for themselves or their families. And the next question is, well, is this happening here in our system? So this is a real patient grievance that I'll just give you a couple of minutes to read. So can you see the similarities between this and those headlines? We happen to know in this case that the police or security was not called, but we certainly have heard of incidents where security has been called on our patients who were just sort of doing normal everyday things. So why equity? Why are we even in this place here at UW Medicine where we're having to talk about healthcare equity, or we're having to do things that are going to change our policies and our procedures and our practices so that we can achieve healthcare equity and decrease our disparities? Well, for us, it's important because it's part of our mission. That's our mission statement. Very simple, straightforward, 7 words: to improve the health of the public. There is no fine print anywhere that says we're going to improve the health of just those members of the public who have commercial insurance, or just those members of the public who have English as their first language, or just those members of the public who conform to traditional gender norms. It means everybody. And it certainly means that we need to focus on those who we have not done the best job with, those who have been historically oppressed and marginalized. So many of you have seen this little graphic, I'm sure. It's been around for a while. So we start over in the upper right quadrant there. And we like to say, well, nobody as a healthcare provider wakes up in the morning and says, boy, I'm going to come into work and just see if I can't perpetuate the inequities in the healthcare system and provide disparate healthcare treatment, right? Nobody does that. You get up in the morning and go, I'm going to use my education and my training, my skills and our policies and procedures and practices and pathways, and I'm going to treat everybody the same with the expectation that everybody's going to have the same outcome. And we know that doesn't happen. What we want to do is get over to the next quadrant where it's equity, where we realize that some people can need the bare minimum, some people are going to need a little bit more, some people are going to need a lot more. And that the reality is down at the bottom there. Remember when I asked those of you who grew up with more than enough financial resources to stand up? That's the person on the 6 boxes there, right? You can give them just the bare minimum, they're going to do great. Somebody else, our standard, also going to do great. So what are we doing for those folks that are down in the hole? They're already marginalized, been oppressed, lots of social complexities. We need to do something different that we're probably not doing yet for that group. So ultimately, we'd like to get to this last quadrant over here where we've removed the barriers in our healthcare system and everybody has the same opportunity to have a good health outcome. I believe there should actually be 2 more boxes on this little graphic. There is another one that shows that group all dressed up and ready to play the game, but they're still standing on the periphery. And I believe we should have them all dressed up in the game as valuable members of the team. And for those of us as healthcare providers, that would mean that we are really engaging our patients and our community as partners in providing healthcare and identifying what they need. So, back to Starbucks. You may remember that after Starbucks had that incident, they took the step of closing all of their stores, and they brought in some national trainers to provide a day-long training for their 8,000 plus employees. They put all of their training materials and their videos and workbooks and all of that on their public YouTube channel. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you have an opportunity. But we like to show a video that just really gives a great depiction of really what is going on in our society today. And then we'll give you a little opportunity to talk about that. There we go.
Dear Starbucks partners, I'm Stanley Nelson, a documentary filmmaker. My films are about race, America, and the decades-long struggle for all people to be treated as equals in public spaces. Our town squares, our stores, our fields, our parks, our pools, our restaurants. I made this film to help us understand this important struggle in our country so we can go forward together.
When I go into stores, sometimes I get followed, which is really annoying. And it just gives me, like, it just makes me uncomfortable. And sometimes I get anxiety, so I have to leave. Especially being a teen of color, they assume that you're doing something bad.
I feel like I'm disturbing people by just being there. Like, people feel uncomfortable when I walk in. I guess I've kind of become numb to it after so many years. Like, this is just my life, and it's just something that I've gotten used to, unfortunately.
I think all of us make that choice at some point of, am I going to take the burden of this interaction being comfortable, or am I going to say, you take the burden of this interaction being comfortable? Because what I really want is a sandwich. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to fight. I'm hungry, right? I don't want to get into this with you, and I'm really not here to teach you this. But other times, it's like, okay, wait a minute. Lesson time.
Discrimination against African Americans in public spaces has a long history. In the 1960s, Black and white students trying to desegregate buses were firebombed. Black patrons were routinely denied service in restaurants and hotels.
I'm sorry, our management does not allow us to serve here.
And civil rights workers were dragged from lunch counters, spat upon, and beaten.
We're willing to be beaten for democracy, and you misuse democracy.
The right to be respected in public spaces was at the heart of the civil rights movement.
They keep thinking we begging them for something. We ain't begging for nothing. We're telling them what is ours right now.
The freedom movement of the 1950s and 60s insisted that the United States live up to its Constitution and allow equal access for all. Finally, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, outlawing discrimination in public spaces. But changing the law doesn't always change reality. And being allowed in doesn't always mean being welcomed.
To be welcomed as a customer means that not only do I allow you in, but it means that I'm glad you're here. I want to serve you. I want your business. And I don't draw distinctions between you and other customers in terms of your value. But it's time we talk about what it means to not be welcomed as an American citizen.
It's not like I can mute my actual physical Blackness right? So I just assume that people see a particular thing when they see the color of my skin. So everything else has to be like perfect and clean and as blended in as possible. Is really just an arsenal of different masks, you know? And it happens every time I leave my house.
When I leave my house, regardless of where I'm going, I'm just leaving my house. Just walking out the door. I'm not walking out the door thinking, what kind of hurdle am I going to run into today? What kind of way am I going to be judged? I walk out a free man. I just do my thing.
I have to make sure that I have given enough space between myself and another patron or another commuter on the train, and just ensure that I'm not making someone uncomfortable. I have to make sure that my hands are visible when I walk into certain places, so they make sure I'm not stealing. I try to make sure I make eye contact with people who may or may not be security or managerial staff, just to ensure that, you know, I'm not here to hide anything. I watch my tone to make sure that I don't come off as threatening. Just leaving the house some days, you know, sometimes it just keep you at home and just keep you away from everything.
For more than 50 years, equal treatment has been the law. Yet, as we know from cell phone videos, the nightly news, and maybe our own experience, we still have a long way to go.
Why are you following?
Watch this.
You think I'm stealing?
You followed me around the store the whole time. There she goes, she thinks I'm stealing.
Your card is fake. You're going to jail. That's what I kept hearing.
Unless you're spending money with a week.
Oh, I'm not spending money because I'm black.
Your manager does not like black people, honey. Yeah. Oh my God. No, this is wrong. Oh my God. Yeah.
We just need to recognize that Black people are navigating the public space differently than white people, that women are navigating the public space differently than men, and not use the shortcut that has been wired into your brain because of the society that we live in, that tells you when you see me, you should be nervous or you should be worried.
It brought me such despair to the day I recognized I had to explain this to my son, that he was gonna, that this muddy river of racism, he was still gonna have to walk through it. We hadn't dammed it, we hadn't dried it up. It was still there for him to go through. And I've got to somehow try to tell him, okay, off you go.
The society I want to see is I want to be able to walk out the house just as free feeling as that white guy who said he doesn't worry about a thing when he walks out the door. I want to have that same expectation.
Today, discrimination is against the law. It's the people and the systems that support our communities that must follow suit. No one's going to do it for us. What can you do to make our schools, our parks, our stores, our restaurants as welcoming and as inclusive as they can be? What kind of country do we want to live in? Who do we want to be?
So Gwendolyn Eiffel said to make our schools, our parks, our stores, our restaurants as inclusive as they can be. What'd she leave out? Yeah, our hospitals, our healthcare system. So give you a little opportunity to talk with each other. So if you're not sitting close to somebody, find somebody to sit close to so that you can talk. And give you just a couple of minutes to have some conversation. How did the video impact you? What was new? And how does the information relate to our ability to create that welcoming and inclusive environment for our patients and our workforce? Discuss. About 1 more minute. Okay, I'm going to bring you back. Welcome back. Welcome back. I know that was not enough time. Great conversations going on. Welcome back. Welcome back. Who would like to share what they talked about? Who would like to share? I'm a teacher. I'll just call on somebody. Oh, over here.
Well, Tom Stager, I came in late because I was addressing some other things, but I
Yeah, I can imagine.
about 9 months ago at our School of Medicine retreat, and the part that I was able to see of individuals and what they think about walking out their front door, I thought about for weeks at least after seeing that video, because for myself and many of us in this room, I think about, you know, what the day is going to be like, this, that, and the other. I don't have to think about how am I going to be perceived, what kind of a face do I have to put on in order to be safe to go out in the world. And that made a huge impact on me, and I continue to reflect on the impact of that contrast.
Thank you, Tom. One more. Yes, in the back.
So all of my great-grandparents, 3 of my grandparents, and 1 of my parents were immigrants to the country. So do I get to say, like, what's, you know, racism has nothing to do with me? One way I've tried to think about this is to look at my parents. My white father could get a union job, and he got into college, and he could get a mortgage and buy into a community, which I found out later had had a covenant that was white people only could buy into that suburb, and accumulated generational wealth and sent me to an Eastern college, which in fact had benefited from slavery. So I think the question I can approach is, did my family benefit from racism? And I think the answer is yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So hopefully this will just be the beginning of conversations that you will continue to have, but we are going to move on. So how did we get here? So it's really important for us to understand the history of race and medicine and racism. Racialized medicine. These are slides from our colleague, Edwin Lindo, who is a critical race scholar. His work is very much about racialized medicine and race in medicine. I would highly encourage you to have him come and do his full presentation. I just borrowed a few of his slides for an expanded version of what we usually do today. So the medical community was key in constructing the construct, which is a political and social construct of race. In this country, it was used by the slavers to ensure that they could continue to believe that Blacks were an inferior race and therefore worthy of being enslaved. This is a medical journal from 1851, and I will just read you a passage from this. Anatomy and physiology have been interrogated, and the response is that Negroes are unfitted because of his organization and the physiological laws predicated on that organization for the responsible duties of a free man, but like a child, is only fitted for a state of dependence and subordination. That was a medical journal from 1851. There were several prominent physicians of that time. This is Samuel Morton, who we're going to talk about in a little bit more about him. But he went on to define the races. Caucasians, distinguished by the facility at which it attains the highest intellectual endowment. Native Americans, averse to cultivation. Revengeful, fond of war. Black people, joyous, flexible, indolent, while many nations which comprise this race present a singular diversity of intellectual character, of which the far extreme is the lowest grade of humanity. Physician saying this. That led to another physician of that time who used his science to create what became Negro medicine. There were actual diseases that were attributed just to Negroes. One of them, drapetomania, psychological mental health disease that was attributed to slaves who wanted to run away, because anybody who wanted to run away from slavery must be crazy, right? The other one is rascality, which is just that they were prone to mischief. And this is back to our Samuel Morton. He was a polygenist, and he believed that different people evolved from different species. If you see right there in the center, that Black people evolved from a giraffe. This is a depiction, a very subdued depiction of James Marion Sims, largely known as the father of modern gynecology. In the center there is an enslaved woman named Anarcha. She was 17 years old. He performed over 30 operations on her without anesthesia in his quest to come up with a procedure to repair fistula. Anesthesia was available at the time. And when he perfected that procedure, he then performed it on white women with anesthesia. That led to Henrietta Lacks. Many of you are probably aware of that from the book and the movie that came out, whose cells were used for many, many medical breakthroughs without her knowledge or the knowledge of her family. And then there was the very famous Tuskegee study, which was commissioned by the US Public Health Service in 1932 to study the natural course of syphilis in about 450 African-American men in the South who were infected without their knowledge. The Public Health Service said to the rest of the health community, if any of these men come into your clinics, please do not treat them. Penicillin was invented in 1942. And this study did not stop until 1972. So that was in my lifetime, in the lifetimes of many of you here. So it was not that far along or away from where we are today. And one of the reasons we do not have the trust in our healthcare system, and things are being perpetuated. So what does that look like in contemporary medicine? This is from a recent medical journal. White medical students and residents hold false beliefs about biological differences between Blacks and whites. These beliefs are associated with racial bias in pain perception and pain treatment recommendations. Many of you have seen, I'm sure, the journal articles that show in emergency rooms in particular that Blacks actually and Hispanics come in with the same types of long bone fractures are given less pain medications than their white counterparts with the same types of injuries. It is further manifested in contemporary medicine with something that we're looking at right now, and that's the EGFR. There's a group that Dr. Tim Dellett, who was here a minute ago, I think he came in and left. Edwin Lindo is part of that group. Our lab medicine leadership, Bessie Young, and some others are now looking at why are we using the EGFR and that racial value that is attached to that, since race is not really a thing and there are no biological differences. And it was based on what came out of Negro medicine, the fact that they believed that Blacks had more muscle mass. And that's where that test came from, and it's still being used today. So we're taking a look at that, whether or not we're going to continue to look at to use that. Another one is in lung function. The spirometry test also has a race correction or ethnic adjustment built into the system. We were actually at a respiratory therapists conference, and we talked to some of the manufacturers, and they confirmed that it is built into the machine itself. And that was based on 1880s Negro medicine that said that Blacks had inferior lung capacity. And we're still using that today. So we need to move on from that. So we're doing this work because it's the right thing to do. We believe we have a moral imperative to try to correct some of the past. We can't change it, but we can certainly move forward and do better than we have in the past. We believe here that at UW Medicine, we have a responsibility for being anti-racist, and that means more than just not being racist. That means actively pursuing changes in policies and practices that will decrease health disparities and remove the inequities in our system. So a lot of people say, why do we start with race? I've been talking about race a lot. Yes, I have. Because that's the system that is deeply embedded in our American society, our institutions, and it's caused the disparities that people of color are facing. It was perpetuated and endorsed by medical science, as I just said. The struggles of Black people in this country begat the struggles of many other oppressed and marginalized populations. It's been used as a divisive issue, as we certainly well know in our climate right now today. And it's really hard to talk about. So we're going to talk about it, because if we don't, we're not going to move forward. Medicine perpetuates all the oppressions, all the isms that we see in our society today. So key concepts: implicit bias, microaggressions, intersectionality. Those are kind of the three that we think are foundational, that we want you to have an understanding of to begin this work. So implicit bias is the one that most of you have had some familiarity with. How many people have taken the IAT online? Oh, good, yeah, most, that's great, fantastic. So you know what it is. It's an unconscious attribute of qualities to a certain group. There are those stereotypes, those shortcuts in our head, as Gwen Eiffel said, that when you see a group of people, you've already made up a decision about what they're gonna be or what they might do to you or who they are, right? They operate unconsciously. They include all of the isms, and they include internalized oppression. And that's when the marginalized groups actually begins to believe those stereotypes and starts to act in that way that is expected. So microaggressions, this was a coin termed by Dr. Chester Pierce in the early 70s. He was a professor of psychiatry at Harvard and wanted to have a way to describe the everyday insults and put downs and indignities that Blacks were experiencing. They are unconscious, often from the person who's perpetuating them and often from the person who is receiving them. They're often called sort of death by 1,000 paper cuts. They can be very difficult to identify and therefore very hard to address. Daryl Sue, another professor at Columbia, went on about 20 years later to define 3 different types of microaggressions. There's the micro assault. That's the most akin to conventional racism. That's calling somebody the N-word. We all know what that is, generally accepted as bad. Micro insult, that one's much more subtle. That is someone saying, huh, you got into UW Medical School? Must have been affirmative action. You took my place of getting in. Or, I have a real life example I like to use. In my previous job, I had a colleague who is Latina. She's in her early 30s. She is an MSW. She's the program director for a human services nonprofit. At that time, she had 2 little girls. They were like 5 and 7 and 4 and 6, somewhere around in there. Her husband is a biotechy guy, worked down in Amazon land at one of those things, biotech engineer type. They live in Seward Park. She has said that on more than one occasion, she has been with her little girls in the grocery store and with them in tow, goes up to pay for her groceries and is asked, oh, will you be using your EBT card today? Yeah, so that's a micro insult. And then micro invalidation, that's minimizing or disregarding the thoughts or experiences of a group, a person of color. And the one that I like to say is, when the Black Lives Matter movement first started, what was the retort to that? Yeah, and of course they do. But by saying that, you're invalidating the disproportionate experience that Black men in particular are having by being being killed by the police. So, last one is intersectionality, term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a legal scholar. And that was her way of trying to explain the difference in the experience that Black women specifically were having as opposed to those experiences of Black men and white women. Black women were being oppressed in both ways, and there was no way to describe that. And so she came up with the term intersectionality. So I'm gonna give you another 2 minutes to answer these questions. When have you experienced or witnessed microaggressions? And why is it important to acknowledge these issues experienced by our patients and workforce as we advance healthcare equity? Go, talk. One more minute. I know it's short. Okay, welcome back, welcome back. Love all the great conversation. Again, this is just the beginning of what we hope will be many more conversations you will have about these issues. One person who'd like to share what you talked about, either a microaggression you have experienced or witnessed, or yes, Jenny.
technician who had a master's degree, and she was from Hawaii. She'd been born in Hawaii. Her family had originally come many, many years ago from Japan. She said, people come up to me and they say, boy, you speak English really well.
That's a classic. Yeah, yeah. That's the micro insult. Yeah. Thank you. We are going to move on just for the sake of time, but I know many of you have more experiences and would encourage you to continue talking about these issues. So what's UW Medicine doing about all of this? This group of brilliant people, some of you are probably in this room or in this picture, came together about 2 years ago and decided that under the CMMI grant that was transforming clinical practice, that we should, in fact, if we were going to transform clinical practice for all of the members of the public, focus on those who were most marginalized and historically oppressed. And that led to our healthcare equity blueprint. 3 objectives in it: workforce, community engagement, clinical improvements. Our workforce, we want to increase diversity and create that welcoming, inclusive environment. So we are doing that by doing work like this, creating the awareness, having people understand the history, understand the experiences that we are all having. We've also, under this, helped people facilitate the convening of equity, diversity, and inclusion committees. I know that you have one in the Department of Medicine. There are many others in other departments, and that's a place where the work can live and be disseminated from. Community engagement. We realized that although in our blueprint we had an objective to have a community advisory council, we didn't really have a community presence that would allow us to go and recruit people for a community advisory council. So we started doing community conversations, and we've done 6 of those, 4 geographic, 2 with specific communities, where we go out, we get in a community space, we do a little bit of presentation about an issue that might be relevant to that community, and then we ask 3 questions. How have you experienced the healthcare system in general? How have you experienced UW Medicine specifically, if you have? And basically, what can we do better? And we've gotten extremely useful information from going out and talking with folks. We will be convening our community advisory council probably in April. And then we have our clinical quality improvements. That's where we're really trying to look at our data and determine how we can identify the disparities and then do something about it. One good example of that is in retinopathy screening. We looked at our data and saw that at Harborview, one of the clinics, there really was no disparity between Blacks and others getting their eyes screened. Determined that was because there was a retinopathy camera that was right there, so somebody didn't have to go make another appointment and go to an ophthalmologist and take off more work. And so, right, it was convenience. And so we bought 26 retinopathy cameras and deployed them. So we will be doing more of that. We have equity dashboards now that are part of the HBI tool, so we'll be able to look at our data in real time, and we are working towards to having it be able to be in Epic, which is we know what the clinicians want. We're not there yet, but we're working and hoping that can happen soon. So what are you supposed to do to help us to do this? We want to leave you with something. After a short presentation like this, we hope we have given you an opportunity to be able to identify implicit bias, microaggressions, discrimination. We want you to be able to understand the history of how we got here and the history of racialized medicine, understand the impact versus the intent of your words and your actions, microaggressions, understand the benefit of diversity and inclusion, and then have some tools to be able to disrupt racism, bias, oppression, and the status quo. You'll notice it spells out IUD. We thought that would be easy for healthcare professionals to remember. It was our attempt to have some humor in this work. There isn't a lot. So, and then lastly, so next steps. We say, find a colleague to be your EDI partner, somebody that you can just go up to. That's that person that can, you know, this weird thing happened, or God, I think I might have made a microaggression the other day. Somebody you can talk with. Practice IUD, make a personal plan that builds on today's learnings. Consider the equity impact of all your decisions. Who is this decision going to benefit? Who might it burden? And then how am I going to mitigate that? Hold each other accountable, hold leadership accountable to making sure that we are moving forward and continuing to prioritize this. And then let us know how we can help you in this journey. That's our team. And that's my time. Thank you.